Good afternoon. This is Terry Goldberg. I'm the Executive Director of the Northeast Waste Management Officials Association, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar on addressing the confusing landscape of compostable products. Hopefully everyone can see this introductory slide. This is a webinar that the Northeast Recycling Council and NMOA are co-sponsoring together, and it's really an idea for this webinar emerged out of our food waste work group, which is a joint work group of NERC and NMOA. And the work group involves state officials who are working on food waste issues, both anything from food waste bans to food waste diversion programs, rescue programs, anaerobic digestion, composting, the full gamut of various ways of managing food waste, diverting food waste from disposal. And in our conversations in our work group, we've been talking about this topic of today's webinar, the fact that there's a lot of compostable products on the market now. There's a lot of confusion in the public about what is truly compostable, what is biodegradable, what do these terms mean, and how to manage these products at end of life. Today, we're going to be hearing from several speakers who are going to talk about the questions that are posted on the slide. We're going to talk about some of the legislation that states and local governments have adopted. Is this a solution to this problem, and what resources and training is needed for various stakeholders involved in this issue? I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and I'm going to turn it over to Athena now, who's going to sort of go through some of the logistics for today's call and introduce the speakers.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being on our webinar. You all have a box to the right. It's the GoToWebinar dialog box, and you will see down on toward the bottom, well, kind of middle of the box is an area for questions. So we get lots of people on the webinars. We don't have everybody talk, but we encourage your asking of questions. And so all you do is type them in there, and then Terry and I will field the questions afterward. So if you have clarifying questions for the presenters as they're finish their presentation, go ahead and put those in there, and we'll address a couple of those after each presenter. And then at the end of the third presentation, we will open it up to all questions. We will, if we get a lot of questions, we'll prioritize the questions through that come from our working group members, because we have others on this webinar who are not members of the working group. So we want to make sure that their questions get addressed. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the webinar posting. It will be on the NERC YouTube channel. So we will start with our first presenter, and that is Mark Williams. Just come up there. And Mark is the Vice President of Market Development for BioBags America. For nearly 15 years, Mark has worked with municipalities and businesses in diverting organics from landfills. He serves as the VP Market Development for BioBag, the world's largest brand of compostable bags with operations in more than 20 countries. Mark?
Well, thank you, Athena. I wanted to thank you for inviting us to join you on this important webinar. As you stated, we are the world's largest brand of compostable bags. All we do make are bags. We don't make some of the disposables that go in the bag, the plates, cups, and utensils. But a lot of these laws apply to all compostables. And but I will be speaking, based on our background as BioBags, selling compostable bags. A lot of the logos you see here at the bottom of the screen are the primary logos we'll be talking about that are identified, certified compostable products. When we first started, there was maybe 2 or 3 compostable bag makers in the world 15 years ago. There's over 50 now, and even more when you get into all the utensils, cups, and plates, and all the disposables that go in our bags. So here's I hate presenters who are manufacturers and having the all the screens come off as an infomercial. So I'm going to try as much as possible to be bagnostic, we call it, and just talk about the compostable laws as they exist. And but this just kind of shows where we operate around the world. Our manufacturing for the Americas is in San Leandro, California, and that's mainly because our first marketplaces for these goods in America were out on the West Coast. But to our topic, addressing the confusion of using of compostable products. Generally, we're talking about utensils, plates, and cups and bags, and as I said, we're just the bag guys, but a bag is quite easy to print logos and messaging on, and so we're able to put big, bold logos with a certified logo on there, compostable information all over our bags, because our bags are quite large. It does get a little bit harder when you're selling utensils and beer cups and plates and clamshells and whatnot. A lot of these items look exactly like their conventional plastic alternatives. And I wanted to clarify at the beginning that I'm going to try to focus on laws that are regarding avoiding confusion of compostable plastics versus conventional plastics. I don't really want to talk about shopping bag laws. That's a whole other topic area. But this one screen I will. But basically the intent of all the shopping bag laws is to get people using reusable bags. And what we've learned on the West Coast is this isn't a big business for biobags selling shopping bags. Our bags still cost more than paper bags. But when it comes to bag laws and bag ban laws, they've been pretty widely embraced because people are trying to get people to use reusable bags, and typically the grocers embrace it because they're able to turn what was once a cost center into a profit center, and they can recoup some of their giveaway bag dollars. And our general, as BioBag, our general view on these bag bans is that why have our bag if your community doesn't have curbside organics? If you're just sending our bags to a landfill, it's really not helping anything. So we haven't really concentrated on selling shopping bags. We sell more to-go bags, but typically it's in markets where there's curbside organic collection. So I did, this past fall, I wanted to talk about contamination a little bit because it's an important factor in the confusion. This past fall, I got the pleasure to tour through Vermont and visit several composting facilities and end users and government entities. And one thing that was curious as I started meeting with some of the actual composters is we discovered this green bag you see on the right is it's a very thick green tinted bag, and everyone I was talking to is like, you know, we are getting a lot of compostables, and some of them we just cannot compost. They won't go away. So we went out into the piles, and we did discover that there was a certain bag that appeared in multiple piles throughout the state, and it was tinted green, and it's about 1.5 mils thick, so a very thick green bag that was being used for organics. Didn't have any print on it, and as soon as I saw it, I realized it wasn't a compostable bag, because all compostable bags have print on them. But it was green in color, so you know, the average end user would not really be able to realize because it's the green of a compostable bag. So it was confusing a lot of end users and ending up in the overs piles. You can see this picture on the left of this huge overs pile with this plastic bag strewn all through it. And we did grab samples of that bag, and we did send it off to a lab on behalf of the various composters we met, and we did discover it was indeed a 1.5 mil thick polyethylene bag. And they were getting loads and loads of these bags from customers who thought they were doing the right thing and just didn't know any better. And this is something we've seen before, that contamination is a big problem at composters. And a relatively famous study in our little world is called the Portland Over Study. This was conducted back in 2012. Basically, Portland, Oregon Metro composters were complaining they couldn't compost compostables. So the BTI, the Biodegradable Products Institute, conducted a study basically to dig through the compost overs and identify everything in there. Everything, pretty much it turned out it was like 95 to 100% polyethylene based or petroleum-based plastics. So it wasn't so much that they weren't able to compost compostables, it's just that they had huge levels of contamination of polyethylene-type products. So I'll get into the California law and the Seattle law here in just a second, but this is the BTI logo that any certified compostable product should have on its packaging, on its website or literature that you may see. But basically this proves that the material and the product is indeed compostable. And as we'll see in a second, I'll get into California, you'll see that this logo is kind of the base of all these laws we're going to talk about. You'll notice that this is just a different version of that first logo. That first logo said the same thing, compostable industrial facilities. This logo has that not suitable for home composting taken off, because there are some products in the market that are industrial compostable as well as home compostable, and we're proud to be one of those. But basically, this logo just means that in addition to going away in the big, huge industrial sites, you're also going to go away in mesophilic temperatures found in home style or community garden style compost facilities. And this is the only other logo that we're going to get into. This is what I was just talking about being okay for home compost. This is BNSOT is a European entity. California and others recognize. There's not a U.S. version of this yet, but basically all the states, California, everyone recognizes this logo as being able to talk about your home compostability. Okay, and so when I first got hired by BioBag, I was BioBag's first employee. They moved me out to San Francisco, which is basically San Francisco is the first major American city to try to collect residential food scraps, and so they were kind of the pioneers in this as far as big, huge towns go. Jack Macy, you see there, is probably the source of most of the legislation on this subject. And I'm not going to read to you a bunch of slides, but this slide I think is important to read and understand. But basically it says that no one shall sell a plastic product, that's bags or utensils or whatever, that with the words compostable, home compostable, or marine degradable, unless at the time of sale that they have a certification that proves that. And also down below you'll see that you cannot sell products that use the word biodegradable, degradable, or decomposable, or anything that implies this will go away in a landfill or any other environment. There has to be a certification showing that your claims are true. And this is the kind of the fundamental first law that everything started from. We had huge problems in California in around early 2000s to 2005 or 6 with a lot of contaminants, and this law was huge in eliminating those. The main culprit in the contamination was degradable polyethylenes, and so basically what a degradable bag is, or an oxo-degradable bag, they're sometimes called, is it's 97+% polyethylene with an additive that makes the bag fragment into little pieces once they're oxidized. So it's typically it's like a 2-year thing, and there's no certification for it. It's just the idea is if you add cobalt to a bag, once the cobalt oxidizes, you're going to get little tiny pieces of polyethylene, which, as you can guess, is actually worse for the environment than sheets of polyethylene. And there's a lot of European studies, and a European Commission just recently sent out a communication to all of its members that they can find no value in oxodegradables, because even if an oxodegradable did go away in a landfill, it's really not helping anything. Once these materials get to the landfill, we've kind of missed the opportunity to reuse them. But there's no evidence they do go away in a landfill, and even if they did, who cares? Is kind of what the EU thing said. The American version of the EU study is the FTC Green Guides, and basically these are just guides for a lot of these laws were written based on the FTC Green Guides, which were started in the 90s. Is in 2012, they got clarified further to give actual examples of what is the misleading claim to a consumer, and had some specific examples that apply to compostable and biodegradable type claims or earth-friendly type claims. So that's a good base set of, you can look up the FTC green guides, and that's kind of a basis for a lot of these laws. And as I said, in California, we had a huge, when we first starting these programs, these food waste collection programs in the Bay Area, there all of a sudden out of the woodwork came dozens of manufacturers with biodegradable claims, not only at retail, but also for commercial liners and things. Here's several brands that only one of these is actually out of business, Green Genius. It was actually started by some guys from Clorox, who I'm glad. But they didn't really understand the laws, I don't think, because they were making an oxidation-degradable bag with a lot of green claims. But we still see, outside of California, we still see some of these brands, and you may see them in your market. And for the average consumer, this is very confusing. If they think they're doing the right thing by buying a biodegradable bag, they don't have the time, or it's confusing to me, and I've been doing this 15 years, but you have to really understand the claims being made. And what California has done is made these illegal, so you can't be making these kinds of claims to the public, and therefore these aren't found in the market anymore. Sego Jackson, now, if any of you know him, Sego, he's with Seattle Public Utilities, and he embraced the California law, and Seattle embraced the California law about making bad claims without certifications. He went one important step further, in my view. At the end, I'm going to have the full links to these laws. I'll have at the end of the presentations for you to, if you want to get into the nitty-gritty detailed law. The California law is like 4 or 5 pages. The Seattle law is a couple of pages, but I'm just kind of pulling out what I think is important. But the big thing Sego did is he established that in addition to having these colors, in addition to having these certifications like the composting logo or OK Compost logo, we need to identify by color as well, because there's a lot of people abusing, even if they're not making a claim, they have products that look like they're compostable. And especially when it comes to the bag world, there's tons of manufacturers coming out with green bags that are sort of very close, almost exactly the color of our bio bags. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think they're trying to confuse the marketplace with their polyethylene bags. But this law helps in that polyethylene bags given to the public cannot be green or brown, and compostable bags that are offered must be green or brown. So it really kind of got rid of a lot of the color confusion. So this is very important to the bag and film world. It doesn't answer a lot of questions when it comes to utensils and cups and straws and whatnot, but this is a big major step in my mind to getting rid of contamination and confusion when it comes to bag films. And I'll show you an example. The big problem Seattle was having was if you go to most any supermarket, you see these kinds of produce bag rolls, and it's called a pull and pack. Crown Poly is a huge, I think they must have 90-something% of the produce bag market. And when I first saw this bag, it's green and it says organic on it, and I thought, they were being devious and purposely trying to trick the public. What they were really trying to do is when a shopper went into the produce department and bought an organic apple over a regular apple, they wanted this bag to help this cashier identify that as an organic apple. So that they weren't, they didn't have evil intent or anything, but they did have a green bag that to the general public looked like it was a compostable bag, and it was getting into the compostable waste stream and causing a lot of contamination. So after Sego passed his law about the green, brown, all of Crown Poly's bags turned blue. So it was a lot better messaging to the public, and they didn't confuse it with the greens that are normally associated with compostable bags. So this law is very big and important to cleaning up some of the contamination. Eventually you're going to see as your programs in the Northeast get bigger and more mature like they already are on the West Coast. So that's mainly for bags, but there are a bunch of cities are banning things like styrofoam and things that aren't recyclable. There's a ton of disposables once they get food soiled. Even if there were a market for them, once they're food soiled, there's not a market for them. And now with a green sword or that's trying to refusing a lot of these materials. A lot of West Coast cities, or really a lot of international cities, even the East Coast and in Europe and elsewhere, are banning things. If they can't recycle them or if they can't compost them, they're getting banned. And Seattle has a law going into effect July 1st, 2018, where straws and utensils can no longer be made from non-compostable materials. So they're getting rid of these materials that have no afterlife. And we think this is a huge step. And like I said, a lot of cities have already done this on styrofoam. And I really do think it's the direction municipalities are going, is that if we can't, and it also applies to flexible packaging, consumer packaging. A lot of packaging given out to consumers cannot be recycled, and if it can't be, the manufacturers need to figure out a way to make it recyclable, or a lot of people are believing this should just all be compostable. Once it's been soiled by food and it has no recycling market, there's a lot of products that are going compostable. So this law is a very big law in Seattle. And again, if you want more detail on it, Sago Jackson is the man, and I can connect you with him if you don't already know. So this is kind of summing up. Avoid confusion and contamination, copy others' legislation. So I'm encouraging you to take we can give you these links via email, or if you want to email me, I can send you these links. They're kind of long. The California law, like I said, is about 4 pages. It's actually quite readable. I'm not a lawyer, but I understood it. Seattle law is even simpler to understand. But I encourage you to, if your municipality is worried about these issues, the wheel has been made, and you don't need to recreate the wheel. It already exists. And I think we'll get into that with the folks from Maryland here about to talk about what they did. And here's my contact information. I am going to be up at the NERC workshop a few weeks in Baltimore. So if you're going to be there, please stop by. We do. I like to give away buckets and bags and things, and I'd be happy to answer any of your questions there if you're going to be there. And I guess that's all I have for you. Thanks for your time.
Great, thank you, Mark. Okay, so we have a couple of clarifying questions. Mark, can you define for us an industrial site, please?
I guess an industrial, I don't know if there's a strict rule on tonnage of an industrial site. To me, an industrial site is owned by a commercial entity or a municipal entity, and has windrows and is turning piles with advanced technologies that allow them to reach sustained thermophilic temperatures. I don't believe there's any set tonnage that defines it as industrial. I think it's just about the equipment and the temperatures they're able to sustain. Typically, industrials are able to sustain thermophilic temperatures, whereas home composters rarely can get to thermophilic temperatures. Basically 131 degrees and up is thermophilic, and that requires a larger pile than you might find at a home site.
Right, my understanding, it would be basically anything bigger than a home or a community as long as they reach those temperatures. Okay, and so do you know what the bags are? What kind of dyes are used in the bags to color them? Like natural dyes, I'm assuming?
Yeah, basically they're soy-based. It's pretty small amount of dye that creates the color, but the inks and everything are all soy-based, and they're all less than a few % of the total content of the bag anyway. But pretty much the green, at least for bags, the green with green print has kind of become the industry standard. I can speak to the bags. I really don't know about pigments used for plates and cups and whatever, or what their prints are. But for BioBag, it's soy-based, and everything's certified compostable.
Great. Okay, so I would like to remind everyone to type in your questions, whether they're for the individual presenter, or if you have general questions about how to move legislation forward or what can be the answer to change this confusion around compostable products. So we will go on. I wanted to also remind everyone that I will send out the link to the PowerPoint presentations we will put on the NERC website. We will also have the recording on the NERC YouTube site, and I will send out links to both of those. And I will also send out the links that Mark had in his presentation so that you all can download the legislation that it's adopted, as well as the Maryland legislation. So on to Maryland, we have David Merkich on our panel today. He is the chief of the Waste Diversion Division at Maryland Department of the Environment, and he has been with MDE for more than 20 years. All right, Dave, ready?
Yes, I am ready.
You got it.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to give a quick overview of Maryland's law here. We are still in the process of enacting it. I mean, it's effective, but October is our deadline for that. So it's going to be a little bit of a quick overview. A lot of it you've already heard in the first presentation, but hopefully a little more some specifics here. Our law is called the Standards for Biodegradable Plastic Products, and it is in the Annotated Code of Maryland, and it's 9/2101 to 2105. And as was stationed earlier, it is a very easy read. You know, part of that is definitions, part of that is enforcement, part of that is the labeling requirements. The law itself, I think, is only 2 pages long, so it's a very easy read at that point. 1 second now, my page is not going down now, so bear with me. There we go. Okay. One of the things that when I was making final edits to this, that I forgot to put on the screen, and it was mentioned earlier, and Maryland has a similar part of the law that says, after October 1st, 2018, a person may not sell in the state a plastic product that is labeled as biodegradable, degradable, decompostable, or with any other term to imply that the product will break down, fragment, biodegrade, or decompose in the landfill or any other environment. And that's unless they meet the standards that are outlined here. Maryland's law, and I'm not going to read these slides because there's a lot of words, but I'm going to summarize them. So if you have questions, please let me know. Applies to plastic products, which you can see there includes package or packaging component, film plastic, food, beverage, or any other plastic product or part of a plastic product. And it also includes film plastic. And there's the statement that I just read. And Maryland does get specific in the fact that it does mention specific standards that must be met. And for a plastic product that is 6400 or ASTM D6400 or D6868. And it also mentions that the applicable labeling guidelines for use environmental marketing claims. And that, I took a look, really deals with false advertising. So you can't claim, and that's what the Federal Trade Commission, you can't say something's happening and it's not at that point. For a plastic product labeled as home compostable, the OK Compost certification standard adopted by Venkat, which was mentioned earlier, is also there, and any applicable guidelines or federal marketing claims. Film plastic pretty much mirrors the plastic products. It does add the biodegradable soil certification standard, and it goes down into some temperatures there that shows at least 90% biodegradation, absolute or relative, microcrystalline cellulose in less than 2 years' time. And it does list some other standards there specific that must be met. And then you can see it must also fulfills plant growth and regulated metals requirements under 6400. The requirements for the plastic bags, it is a labeling requirement. And you can see that there are certain criteria that must be met for the labeling. must be that is readily and easily identifiable from other plastic bags. Again, the federal guidelines for the use of environmental marketing claims, and with a certification logo indicating that the bag meets the 6400 specifications. And then it goes into some other things, a uniform color of green and labeled with at least 1 inch from the side of the bag, the compostable, and from both sides of the bag, and just placement of all these labels on the bags. And that's known as everyone's ever seen a television commercial or anything else, so you aren't up there with a magnifying glass trying to identify if the bag meets the requirements. Size limitations, it goes into for more specific for plastic bags, depending on the size of the bag. And one thing that is interesting is that a compostable plastic bag sold or distributed in the state may not be labeled as recyclable. And then again, conflict with the federal law. For the food and beverage products, they pretty much mirror the plastic products. And it's again with the labeling and the 6400 and the 6868 standards. And like I said, that is the specifics of it, but it pretty much mirrors the other part. Like I said, I'm giving a quick overview here because there's a lot of words here, and just so you can see where we're going. Penalties. One of the things that's interesting, and I don't know if California is similar, is enforcement of this law in Maryland is at the local level. So, and anybody and any local level, either county or municipality that does enforce the law actually will be the place that gets the money for the violations at this part. So even though it's a state law and we're going to be looking to implement it and get the word out on it, enforcement is done at the local level on this. And you can see the penalties: $500, $1,000, and $2,000 for first, second, and third offenses. Okay, implementation, where we stand right now. We are creating right now on our web page, different from the legislative web page on the department's web page, a land law page. And that law page is probably going to contain two years worth of laws that have passed that affect the general public in Maryland about that. And in addition to listing all of the laws, we're going to pull out and give specifics and links to the laws that that require local action. So the plastic bag law here will be pulled out, and another one, just as an FYI, to show we're looking at the lead wheel weight law that recently passed, will be pulled out because that requires local. We're going to be contacting all the counties, informing them of the law and their responsibilities in the law for enforcement of it. And we are going to be contacting trade organizations and representing manufacturers affected by the law, informing them of the new requirements. Now, one thing I found interesting, I just got back from the Measurement Matters Summit in Chattanooga, Tennessee last week. And there was a bag manufacturer there. And I approached them about the law and informed them with the law, and they were actually thrilled with it. Because he said a lot of his people in the industry are also thrilled with the law because they are having issues with copycats that don't really meet the same standards, and they're claiming to have these capabilities, and it's giving them a bad name, and they're undercutting their prices. So by forcing or the labeling of it, they think it's going to go a long way to straightening that up. And actually, their bags were already labeled with the 6400 standard across their bags. And they said they already do business in Maryland, so they don't see any problems with that. But they were actually quite tickled pink with the law. And then Maryland's law, just an FYI, is very similar. It was based upon California's law. So we don't expect any issues with this because manufacturers may already be prepared for the labeling requirements. That is my contact information, and let me know if you have any questions.
Any clarifying questions for David? I have a couple. What precipitated the law, David?
You know, I don't know that. I wish I could tell you, but I am not privy to that information, I guess is the best way to put it.
Okay, and then what are you going to do about the food service items distributors, the product distributors where, say, restaurateurs and special event vendors, where they get their products from? Anything in the law to address those folks, because they're actually the ones selling these products?
Yeah, the law is strictly for the labeling of the products. So we are going to, as part of our outreach to the counties and everything and the trade organizations, I'm going to dig through and look at organizations that represent that, and I'm going to try to get the word out as much as I can to as much as different types of industry as possible that may be using the products at that point.
Yeah, because if there's nothing prohibiting distributors from marketing or selling the actually falsely labeled compostable products, doesn't seem like it'll have enough of an impact.
You got to remember the law does have a thing that they cannot be sold in the state after October 1st. So they would be subject to the penalties if they are selling it after that date.
So the distributors would be.
Like I said, the law says that plastic product, it cannot be sold in the state. So yes. And I think the exact word is, let me look at it because I have the law in front of me. A person may not sell in the state a plastic product that is labeled as, and then it goes into the terms of it at that point.
And then how about a similar law for recyclable products? Do you have anything similar?
The products that are covered under this, and I'm pulling up the definitions here just so I can read them to you. A plastic product means a bag, a sack, a wrap, or any other film plastic product. That's a film plastic. Food or beverage product means used for food or drink, made of plastic or paper with a plastic coating. Food or beverage product includes containers, food serviceware and utensils, and straws and lids. And plastic products, like I said, includes packaging, a film plastic, food or beverage product, and any other plastic product or part of a plastic product. So it includes all of that.
Great. Right, and everybody on the webinar, I will send out the links to Maryland's legislation as well. Okay, so next up we have Dan Goosen, who is the General Manager for Green Mountain Compost. Green Mountain Compost is in the Chittenden Solid Waste District in the Burlington area of Vermont. It is operated by owned and operated by Chittenden Solid Waste District. So Dan started at the Intervale Compost operation in 2003, and then took over the role for General Manager in 2008 of the Green Mountain Compost. Dan spends a lot of time stuck in front of a computer, but loves getting out to turn, screen, or bag compost whenever he gets the chance. All right, Dan?
Hello there. Thank you for that introduction. So yeah, I've been with the compost facility at our present location for the last 8 years, but we've been a compost entity in Vermont, the largest compost entity of food scraps in the state for the past 25 to 30 years. So we've been through our share of issues, and compostable plastics and what the implication of those is in our process is just one of many that we've had to struggle with and come up with some answers. And we're still not quite there, but I'll talk to you about some of the things that we've discovered and some of the things that are challenging to us, and particularly as it relates to the legislation that's been discussed out west and in Maryland. So here's an overview of our compost facility. We're in a semi-rural location now, which is great. We used to be right in the heart of Burlington, basically, and odor problems were much more vexing at that point. As Athena mentioned, we're part of the biggest solid waste district in Vermont, and we're in the most urban location in Vermont. most of you are probably familiar with the Burlington area, but if not, it's the home to the majority of the larger businesses. And we take in food scraps from all sorts of entities, including supermarkets and cafeterias, schools, and most of them have been active for quite a while, but we've seen a huge ramp up in participation from generators since the implementation of Act 148, which happened, or some of you are probably familiar with, starting in 2012 and has been ramping up ever since. So we're currently taking in about 6,000 tons a year of food scraps, and somewhat unique to us is the fact that we derive a fair amount of our revenue, the vast majority actually of our revenue, from the sale of materials. Most municipal composting operations, in fact, most composting operations, probably this is reverse, where the majority of revenues come from tip fees rather than the sale of finished product. And I mention that only because it makes us look at everything from that perspective of having to maintain really high-end premium quality of all of our product blends, and that is not the case for most municipal compost operations, where their primary objective is to just get rid of material that otherwise would be going to the landfill. That's still very important for us, but because of our revenue mix, we are forced to look at it from multiple angles. Most of what we sell is in the form of premium bulk and bag products. You can see an array of bag products that we sell there. And the majority of what we sell is in the form of bulk products, but they're both of premium quality. And so when we are addressing things like compostable plastics, we take that into account. Just a couple of shots there. That's a typical pile of food scraps in the back there that we receive on a regular basis. Largely, the majority of food scrap, the majority of compostable plastics we've seen coming in over the years have been from some of our larger generators and the ones that have been at it for a long time, such as our universities, our hospital. And these are folks who are really on top of their game and have wanted to do the right thing for many, many years. And we've been, fortunately, when we've run into issues in the past, we've been able to work with them and address them fairly quickly. I will mention, though, we have some new challenges that have been a little bit trickier to address, and so we're not quite where we want to be. So since their arrival on the scene, compostable plastics have seen a huge growth in the marketplace. We've been receiving bio bags for a very long time, but as it was mentioned, it's a hugely diverse marketplace now, and a lot of players getting into the game, seeing money to be made, and as a result, every composter is being placed into this position of having to decide how they're going to fit into their operation, if they're going to accept them at all. And from a diversion standpoint, compostable plastics are generally thought of as contributing to increased diversion. But there's some potential negative outcomes associated with accepting these material. So just to go through these. Increased diversion, if you have a liner bag in your tote behind your business, generally you're going to have better participation rates, or even on a curbside pickup scenario, if you have a liner between the rotten food or the nasty material that you're trying to get rid of and the plastic that's going to go right back on your lawn or in your driveway or in your business, generally you'll have better participation and people who want to keep going with it, and so particularly the liner bags are incredibly, they've been shown, there's studies that point to how they increase diversion. And for every compostable liner bag you've got or compostable plastic implement or food service ware piece, you're potentially getting rid of a traditional plastic one, which is probably a good thing. It also leads to guilt-free disposal, so folks on the consumer end really like to think that they're doing the right thing, and they can throw something in a container and presume that it's going to be made into a great compost and they're going to feel good about it. So some of the drawbacks, however, are that they don't all break down the same. This was particularly problematic early on when compostable plastics, or what were being labeled as compostable plastics, were being brought to the marketplace. and things have improved dramatically, but it's still, as was discussed earlier, there's still some bad apples out there, and they make it harder for everybody trying to do the right thing. And for those of us on the receiving end, it continues to be a complicated issue. So things that are really, even the compostable, certified compostable plastics that have the appropriate certifications and labeling, some of those they're not going to break down even in the most robust composting operations, because every composting operation is a little bit different. Every batch is a little bit different. And if you talk to any compost facility accepting them, they will likely tell you that not 100% of the compostable plastics they receive are completely broken down in the initial stages of their process. So that's an issue. It can also be disruptive to the composting process. So particularly the film plastic, compostable film plastics, if you're trying to blow air through the pile and within an active aeration environment, in those initial stages, if you have multiple layers of film plastic, even if it's compostable, any type of film is going to inhibit that airflow and create pockets where there's less oxygen penetration. If you've got an agitated pile that you're mixing all the time, that's probably not a huge issue. And even in the aerated piles, it's not an issue for very long if indeed they are compostable and will break down quickly, but something to address nonetheless. It can lead to increased contamination, and so there's the issue of the things that are labeled as compostable and actually have been certified as compostable having varying rates of degradation. But then the bigger problem is the visible distinguishability of items that you might be receiving as a composter. So liner bags that have been labeled, and I think most of them are now very well labeled, the ones that are truly compostable, are pretty easy to distinguish. Even in a pile, when sometimes we'll get 10 or 15 tons of material all dumped at once from one of our waste haulers, and you can tell which ones are the compostable bags almost instantly. The ones that are not compostable are still an issue if they are green, and some of the pictures that Mark was showing were from our facility that he visited this fall. We have struggled with the green liner bags that are not compostable, and we do not do our own hauling, so we're reliant on the haulers to tell us or to help identify where things are coming from, which is very difficult when they have a commingled 10 to 15 ton load, but I can get back to that. But I lost my train of thought here a little bit, but the basic idea here is that the cups, if you have a clear plastic cup, it's really hard to tell if that's compostable or not, particularly if your vantage point is from a front-end loader, which is our main point of front-end processing. Some bigger compost facilities in warmer climates have pretty good pre-screening processes where they actually hand-pick materials on the front end of their composting process. And at that point, there's a chance that you might have a little bit more distinguishing between actually truly compostable and something that looks close, but it's really hard once you've got a bag full of anything. Excuse me. Once that's mixed in, excuse me, one sec. All right, trying to talk so you can hear me. Sorry about that. Once those are mixed in, it's really hard to tell them apart. So that's an ongoing issue. If you end up, or if you're taking any plastics, compostable or not, because of that, the issues that they bring along, the compostable plastics can bring along plastics that are not compostable, you almost always are going to see diminished product quality to some degree. You can screen it out. We rely on screening out the contaminants of all types over a certain size for the majority of our product assurance, but not every compost facility is going to have that capability. Excuse me. And then because they exist, and it's not really their fault, but because this marketplace exists, it enables the greenwashing and compostability claims for these other players, the bad players who are taking advantage of the folks who want to do the right thing, the consumers who want to be doing the green option and then going out and trying to buy something from their vendor or on the internet, and just being very confused because there's a lot of confusion out there, as Mark alluded to, with some of the products that are being represented as biodegradable, degradable, green, earth-friendly, all of that. For us specifically here in Vermont, and actually most of the country, starting 7-8 years ago, the National Organic Program, which oversees a lot of the organic certification that happens, or all the organic certification that happens in the country for, be it your organic produce or food products or things that go with that, such as compost, anything that contains compostable plastics in the blend is generally is no longer going to be approved for use on organic farms and gardens. So from a composter who's depending on a lot of their revenue from the sale of materials, this is an important point. Prior to 2010, all of the products we made were approved for use on organic farms and gardens. And when the Vermont certifier that we use interpreted the national laws to say that those were no longer allowed, that meant the majority of the products we make are no longer approved for use on organic farms and gardens, despite us not changing the recipe at all. So it's just their interpretation of the rules that changed, and as a result, we're pretty lucky. We have a great brand recognition and good customer loyalty, and we were able to explain to people that despite the lack of certification, we still have really high quality product. And by the way, the recipe is identical to what it was before they changed the rules. So, but it also meant that we've had to create a dual stream for our compost. So our bagged products all still carry the organic certification, and it means that we've just excluded all of the compostable food scraps that are coming in. So it's a little bit more tricky. And guilt-free disposal on that one too, because as a solid waste entity, we certainly, our main goal is to decrease waste and disposal. And so making it easy for people isn't necessarily the right thing in our mind. So, it might make them feel good, but at the end of the day, we still think folks using metal food service where, metal forks, knives, spoons, and cups that can be recycled or preferably washed and reused, plates and so forth, that's still the better answer. And lastly, it doesn't add anything to our quality of our product or the volume of our product. You put a compostable item into our compost, best bet is, or the best outcome is that it just disappears and you don't see it on the back end. But it's not increasing the volume or the quality, and it's has all these negative attributes. So it's a challenge. Quick history of how we've dealt with compostable plastics. In the mid-2000s, we started to see the first wave of items coming in. And with it, actual truly compostable plastics like BioBag, they've been around for a long time. We've had great luck with them since the beginning. But we saw coming in with them the first wave of fake compostable products. And our biggest bad actor at that point was a brand called Taterware. And we got in hundreds of thousands of forks, knives, spoons that were, I believe, our local hospital had bought, many cases of them for their cafeteria, and they were actually labeled compostable. And this was back before there was a whole lot of regulation and enforcement around it. And so we spent many weeks and hours of labor hand picking out all of the supposedly compostable food service ware. And shortly after that, excuse me, banned them from all cutlery because they weren't breaking down very well. So just a visual depiction of what one of the problems is here. Here we've got an actual certified compostable cup. This one happens to be PLA, but it looks an awful lot like the polystyrene clamshells that came in the same load. And then unless you get real close, who knows what that one is. Our forks, knives, and spoons now ideally have some visual distinction. Some of them have a cutout in the handle, but we're not seeing that level of detail from the seat of a loader when we're mixing multiple tons at a time. So back to the timeline real quick. In 2009, we banned all cutlery, incoming cutlery, because it was not working. In 2010, we considered, that's when the National Organic Program laws were, or their rules were being changed, and we were trying to decide whether or not to accept them at all. We decided to accept them and created a dual stream compost operation at our new facility. A few years later, after there had been some enforcement and improvement in formulations, improvement in labeling, we decided to lift the ban on the cutlery. And at that point, we were then accepting all certified compostable products. And since then have had a fairly good run and haven't had overwhelming complaints. However, in the last several years, we have seen an influx of the unlabeled green film liner bags that Mark showed in his slide, and he actually has a better picture of it than I do. I think I have a picture of it coming up as well. But we did, this is just a quick snapshot. We did an extensive study here on site for a bunch of different cutlery when we were determining whether or not to lift our ban. They all met a minimum level of degradation, and we were satisfied. So FTC and Attorneys General have started taking action. That began probably 10 years ago, and both on the federal level and even here in Vermont. And that was followed by the legislative action on the West Coast that you've heard about, in Maryland, and those are great steps in the right direction. But we're still nervous, I think, as a composter and the biggest composter in the state. Compost in Vermont is incredibly highly valued. We get a great price for it. It's known to be pretty pure by the folks who buy it. So not just our brand, but all the compost being sold in Vermont is really high quality compared to a lot of compost I've seen elsewhere in the country. And so it's a real challenge how to deal with compostable plastics. And growth in that industry is just through the roof. I read that production and bioplastics in general is supposed to double this year from last year, 1 year alone, and it's not slowing down anytime soon. So we're a little bit nervous about what's to come. We think there's going to be a lot more coming our way. This is a recent picture of one of our loads. You can see there's a bio bag there. Looks good. That one's great. Probably all the green bags, the big green bags, are all indeed compostable. But there's a funny looking green bag in the back, and if I had to guess, I would say that was probably one of the ones that was not compostable. So really, there's two issues. The liner bags are a little bit different in my mind than the rest of the compostable plastics, but they're all problematic. And one of the things that we're considering is trying to come up with legislation perhaps similar to those that have been mentioned already, and see if we can't replicate that here in Vermont. Again, you can see a little plastic contamination here, but the majority of this is indeed certified compostable with a couple of questionable players in the mix. And this is just a recent search I did, or somebody on our staff did, to see what was available in the marketplace, to see, you saw some better examples from Mark's slides, but what's being peddled out there. This is really confusing. If you're working for a food service industry, you're trying to buy something that's going to be beneficial for the environment and also appealing to your customers. You come to a website like this and they have what's labeled green trash bags. Well, if you click through on that, you'll see they actually are certified compostable bags. But on the same page, they're also offering earth-friendly plastic bags. And if you click through on that, you can find out what earth-friendly means. And I believe this is where it goes. This is what they're selling is a Think Green carry-out superweight bag, and it's one of those where it has been made from recycled materials and will begin breaking down within 9 months. Think Green. So if you're a customer and you have that and you aren't super educated on this topic, or maybe even if you are, you're still probably going to be confused and not know, does this go in my recycling bin? Can I put it in with my compost? or should I throw it away? And of course, this one you should probably throw away. But it's really confusing. And as a result, we are looking for opportunities to propose some legislation. We are still not entirely decided about what we want to do with compostable plastics moving forward. It's a very challenging decision. We've gone back and forth time and time again over the years, and most compost facilities in our state actually do not allow any compostable plastics, and it's much easier to close the door entirely because then anything that looks like it might be a contaminant is a contaminant, whereas for us, we have to get down real close, and it's just not very practical to do so. So there is potential for legislative action in future sessions. This current legislative session in Vermont, all the solid waste focus is being tied up with relook at Act 148, which was the universal recycling legislation that was groundbreaking when it came out in 2012. It's run into a few challenges from haulers and the other folks trying to implement it. So that's taking up a lot of focus, and we decided that trying to push the bag language this current legislative session would likely mire for further delay what they were trying to accomplish in that reworking of that legislation. That's still underway. We'll see where that goes, but we know of legislators who are favorable to this and really don't anticipate a whole lot of pushback if it were to be introduced in terms of industry and other folks. I'd be curious to hear what the types of pushback were realized in Maryland and Washington and even in California when their legislation went into play. But we're such a small state, and we have so few vendors of these products that I think most of them actually do want to do the right thing. So I would think that pushing forward legislation won't be a huge ask, hopefully when it comes up potentially in the next session. That was a little bit scattered, but I appreciate sticking with it, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Mark, David, and Dan, for all your presentations. We do have at least one question coming in. So what about facilities that are in need of additional carbon for their piles?
As it relates to compostable plastics or just carbon in general?
It doesn't really make that distinction.
So their carbon sourcing is a big problem for a lot of places. I know in Vermont it is a big problem. There are folks at the state who have talked about creating directories where suppliers of carbon material, like people who grind wood, where they could quickly find places to get rid of it. A lot of places are having to just buy in carbon, including our own facility. We get most of our carbon from leaf and yard waste collected by the municipality and dropped off by residents and landscapers, but we end up buying in a fair amount of wood chips as well. And so it's an expensive endeavor to buy enough carbon to meet your nitrogen demands if you are taking in large volumes of food scraps, and that's a huge challenge here in Vermont, and I know elsewhere as well. If the question was about the carbon content of the compostable plastics, at this point it's fairly negligible. I mean, we're seeing these things make up a larger and larger portion of our incoming food scraps for sure, but by weight it's still a pretty small percentage. And so while there will be carbon resulting from the breakdown of this material, it's at this point still fairly negligible in our system anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Issues or benefits of compostable paper, though, because I know in Windham County we take any kind of paper you can get. And just to point out too, there's a huge value with using compostable bags in terms of limiting freezing within the carts and containers. Don't you find that, Dan?
In terms of limiting, sorry, I missed what you said.
Limiting any freezing that might happen in carts and containers.
Oh, yes, I believe that is true. In our climate, as in most of the climates where people are listening from today, I'm sure, there's huge problems at restaurants and other places for food scraps freezing to the sides of carts, and having any type of liner in there is going to facilitate quicker dumping. There's still problems. You know, if you get, these bags aren't perfect, you get a tiny leak and a little bit of moisture leaks out, that can be enough to hold the whole thing in there like a frozen chunk, or if it actually freezes solid, still problematic, but it is a benefit in that regard, yes.
And I wanted to ask you, do you work with your haulers, or does Chittenden staff work with the haulers to better the feedstock that they're providing you?
We do, to a degree. We have a staff within CSWD whose job it is to go out and work with these businesses directly, particularly if there's issues, but even if there aren't issues. And in the instances where we've decided that an issue is great enough to be followed up, we've had good success decreasing contaminants coming from individual generators. I have to say we're a bit guilty in not putting as much effort into that in this green liner bag situation as we might. So I think moving forward, we most likely will be stepping that up and trying to identify who and where these are coming from with the help of our haulers, because as was mentioned, it's probably not very many people, and we could potentially fix our problem fairly easily if we identified who they were.
Well, and I know with my on-the-ground work, it seems like there's really two issues. The one is the compostability and the definition of that, and whether there's greenwashing with those bags and non-certified compostable products. But also then, if you're getting the mixes of the real plastic serviceware, plastic glass, for example, along with the compostable plastic serviceware, that's an education issue all by itself.
Sure.
So yeah, we need to educate our food scrap generators.
Yeah, which soon will include, here in Vermont, if things stand, will include residential level, which probably is, you know, a harder audience to educate just due to the sheer size and diversity of that group. So it's something that we're pretty nervous about. If we maintain our current acceptance protocols, we foresee a lot more volume of materials coming in and a lot more confusion in terms of what people should include or not include.
So there's another question that's come in. Can compost sites only accept compostable plastic that they, i.e. the composter, sells?
They do that out west. So in some of, I mentioned our scale compared to the rest of Vermont. We're a pretty big composter we're the biggest food waste composter in Vermont, pretty big for the Northeast, but we're pretty small still compared to some of the big facilities out west where some of this legislation has already been enacted. And that includes Pacific Northwest, where Cedar Grove is a big facility out there who actually makes their own compostable products, and it's all labeled with their brand, and they've had some great success, I believe, in limiting contamination by accepting their materials. They also accept a lot of other materials, but for new vendors looking to do the right thing, they can go straight to that compost facility and buy quantities of stuff they want to be accepted.
Yeah, I wanted to discuss with our food waste working group about the notion of having a Northeast sort of website like what Cedar Grove has, that here's a list of your compostable products available in the Northeast, and here's what they look like. So maybe that's something that our working group can talk about and see if that would be beneficial. With the links that I'll send out, I will send out the Cedar Grove website link as well. If y'all haven't been there, it is a great website. And I had a question for Marilyn and Mark, or any of the panelists. Do you know what you're going to do, Dave, about any internet purchases of compostable products or falsely labeled compostable products?
Right off the top of my head, no, but I can tell you we have, the ban with our electronics that you can't sell in the state unless you're registered. And we, in that end, we go after the retailers, but we have in the past reached out to internet manufacturers to go after them. But the electronics law, though, says the retailers can be fined too, and the law here does not say the end user can be fined. So we would have to go out for the people selling it online. We do have somebody research and do web searches for us, so we would just loop that in with that. That would be my plan right now.
Yeah, because I work with a lot of special event vendors who do purchase their products offline or on the internet. So
yeah, and that's why we're shooting for these trade organizations and stuff like that. And like I said, though, you got to remember that this is also enforcement is at the local level, so it's going to be up for the counties and stuff to do. But if we're aware of any, we will let the counties know of that if someone lets us know for a complaint or something along those lines.
So, David, the state has no enforcement authority whatsoever. They can't take enforcement action just at the county or municipal level?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. That's interesting. So we have another question come in. Does the USDA organic standard allow compostable plastics used in mulch weed suppressant for strawberry fields now, as BioBag informed me? And is there any discussion with USDA organic standards to begin allowing compostable products and certified organic compost? Sort of two parts to this.
I'm guessing Mark would probably have a better answer for that. Yeah.
Yeah, the OMRI standards now, the NOP standards. This has been an ongoing debate for a decade or more. Basically, there used to be a bunch of local OMRI. There'd be OMRI of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, wherever, that each made their own decisions. We kind of welcomed the NOP board to set up a national organic protocol for everybody to work under. Right now, the way the laws or their certifications read is they don't like anything synthetic, even if it can be proven that it's 100% compost. So we don't really totally understand the rules. We know that our stuff is proven to break down into base elements, whereas a typical composter is getting organically grown fruits and vegetables and all kinds of cereal boxes and all kinds of weird stuff in their piles, and that's okay. But our film that delivered those goods is not. So there's been kind of an ongoing debate on the rules of not only our materials passing through Green Mountain Compost Facility and being able to be organic, used by organic farmers, but also the laying out of the films. They're starting to warm up to it. Basically, their European standards allow it, and it's still kind of it's not really a great market for us for organic farmers, because they're technically by the rules not allowed to use this, even though we can prove we go away better than their current polyethylene films. And polyethylene degrades in sunlight too, and so what's happening now is the films are strawberry films are typically used for a couple of years, and over that time they do break down, and you do get polyethylene fragmentation into the soil that permanently stays there. So their rules are kind of encouraging more polyethylene in the soil than less, and so it's kind of been an ongoing battle. But at this time, they don't really like biodegradable mulches for organic farmers right now in America, that they do in Europe. Does that answer?
Yes. Okay, if anybody has any final questions, go ahead.
This is Maryland. I actually have one final thing. I wanted to just clarify something for everybody, because I was reading over the law specific here. Maryland's law, like I said, it is for the sale of it, but for plastic bags and food and beverage containers, it also is for people that distribute the product to in the state.
Good. Okay. That's great.
And on that point, I wanted to add to the teeth behind the law. And in California, they do have an entity called Californians Against Waste, and they're kind of like the gatekeepers of claims. And the beauty of the law is when manufacturers or retailers or distributors are discovered selling things that don't meet the law, a bio bag or a consumer doesn't have to go sue that entity. They can just kind of pass it off to the Californians Against Waste, who send them a letter, basically a cease and desist letter. Some of them end up in fines and stuff, but typically a letter from the Californians Against Waste is enough to get rid of the bad player in the marketplace for making claims.
Certainly a model that Toxics in Packaging, TPCH of our organization, does for Toxics in Packaging. So there are models out there for that. Any other questions or comments from the panelists? Final words?
I'm good.
All right. Well, I want to thank you all for being on here, and I'm hoping we will continue this conversation at one of our upcoming meetings. Terry, do some closing remarks?
No, I just want to thank Mark, David, and Dan again for your great presentations, and that, as Athena mentioned, we will be posting the slides and the recording on NERCS, and we'll link to it from NUMOA's website as well. And thank all of you for attending today's webinar and for all of your good questions. And as Athena said, we'll continue this conversation in our work group. If you have any, we certainly value your feedback on this webinar, and if you have any comments or suggestions on the webinar, please don't hesitate to email either one of us, and we will certainly look at your feedback, and we'll try to make improvements in any future webinars that we hold. We have been talking about holding additional webinars on this topic because we think it's a very important and kind of rich topic, but we don't yet have any plans for that, but stay tuned and keep in touch with us. So again, thanks to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.